Sometimes life takes everything from you all at once, and you have to decide if you're going to lie down or stand back up. For Corinne Yates, that moment came at 62 when her only son died, her marriage ended, and the bank took her home. Most people thought grief had broken her when she disappeared without a word. But Corinne hadn't given up. She walked into the mountains with an old backpack, a used axe, and nothing left to lose. For 3 years, nobody knew where she'd gone or what she was doing. Then a hiker got lost and found something nobody expected deep in those woods. What Corinne built with her own 2 hands left the whole town standing there in silence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Before everything fell apart, Corinne Yates lived the kind of life most people would call ordinary. She'd spent 40 years teaching 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary, the same small brick building where she'd once been a student herself. The town of Millbrook sat in a valley where the Cascade foothills met farmland, population 3,200. The kind of place where everybody knew your name and your business, whether you wanted them to or not. Her house on Maple Street was a modest 2-story built in 1972, the year she and Robert got married. White siding, blue shutters, a front porch with 2 rocking chairs that hadn't rocked in years. Inside, the walls held 40 years of family photos, school pictures of Michael from kindergarten through high school, vacation snapshots from camping trips to the mountains, holiday dinners with Robert's parents before they passed. The living room smelled like old books and the lavender sachets she kept in the linen closet. Everything had its place. Everything was familiar. Corinne had a routine she'd followed for decades. Up at 6, coffee while watching the morning news, shower, dressed in one of her sensible teaching outfits, slacks and a cardigan, usually in earth tones. She'd pack her lunch the night before, same turkey sandwich on wheat bread, apple, granola bar. Drive the 7 blocks to school because her knees had started bothering her around age 55. Park in the same spot, 3rd row from the entrance. Greet the same colleagues in the teacher's lounge. Stand at her classroom door, welcoming students by name as they filed in. Her students loved her because she had patience that seemed endless. She remembered every child's birthday, knew which ones needed extra encouragement, which ones needed gentle redirection. She kept a drawer full of pencils because kids always forgot theirs. She had a bin of used coats in the closet for children who came to school cold. Parents requested her class year after year. Mrs. Yates really cares, they'd say at conferences, and it was true. She did care. Teaching was never just a job to her. But if you'd asked Corinne who she was, beyond being a teacher, beyond being Robert's wife or Michael's mother, she wouldn't have known how to answer. Her identity had been built from these roles, layer by layer, until she couldn't remember what lay underneath. Robert worked at the lumber mill on the edge of town, same job for 38 years. He was a quiet man, steady, the kind of husband who fixed what broke and paid the bills on time, but never had much to say over dinner. Their marriage had been comfortable more than passionate, even in the early years. They raised Michael together, attended his soccer games and school concerts, took camping trips every summer to the mountains. But somewhere along the way, they'd stopped really talking. They'd become 2 people living parallel lives under the same roof, intersecting only when necessary. Michael had been the light in that house. Born when Corinne was 31, he was an easy baby who grew into a curious, kind-hearted boy. He loved the outdoors the way Corinne did, inherited her fascination with how things grew and lived and changed with the seasons. Starting when he was 6, she'd take him hiking in the foothills every weekend, the weather allowed. She taught him to identify animal tracks in the mud, deer, raccoon, coyote, bear. She showed him which plants were edible, which were poisonous, how to read the sky for coming weather. They'd pack sandwiches and spend whole Saturdays following game trails, collecting interesting rocks, watching birds. Those hikes were where Corinne felt most herself, most alive. In the mountains, she wasn't Mrs. Yates the teacher or Robert's wife. She was just Corinne, a woman who understood the language of the woods, who could start a fire with friction if she needed to, who knew how to find water and build shelter. Her grandfather had taught her these things during summers at his homestead when she was young, before he died when she was 16. He'd been a man who believed in self-reliance, in knowing how to take care of yourself with your own two hands. "The world's full of people who don't know how to do anything real anymore," he'd say, while showing her how to notch logs or tan a hide. "You remember this, Corey? You remember you're stronger than you think." She'd carried those lessons quietly through her adult life, never really using them, but never forgetting either. They were tucked away like old photographs in a box in the attic, occasionally remembered but rarely examined. Michael graduated high school with decent grades and big dreams. He wanted to study environmental science, maybe become a park ranger. He worked construction that summer to save money for college, planning to start classes in the fall. He was 19, still living at home, still going on those weekend hikes with his mother, even though his friends teased him about it. "That's our thing," he'd tell them, unbothered by their jokes. The town of Millbrook had its rhythms and its characters. Sheriff Ben Holloway had known Corinne since they were kids together, had been 3 grades ahead of her at the same elementary school where she now taught. He was a solid man, fair, the kind of law enforcement a small town needed. His wife had died of cancer 8 years back, and he'd thrown himself into his work afterward. Something Corinne understood more than she ever wanted to. Paula Drummond lived next door, a widow herself, 10 years older than Corinne. She kept a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood and made jam she'd bring over in mason jars. She and Corinne had coffee together most Tuesday mornings before school, talking about small things, never anything too deep. That was how friendships worked in Corinne's world. Pleasant, consistent, surface level. Tommy Brenner owned the hardware store on Main Street. He'd been one of Corinne's students 20 years back, a boy who struggled with reading but had gifted hands that could fix or build anything. She'd encouraged him to pursue that talent, and he'd never forgotten. Whenever Corinne needed something for the house, a new hose washer, picture-hanging hooks, wood stain for the porch, Tommy would spend time making sure she got exactly what she needed, explaining how to use it if necessary. These were her people, her community. They formed the backdrop of her daily existence, familiar as the mountains on the horizon. The house on Maple Street held decades of accumulated life. Michael's room still had his soccer trophies on the shelf, posters of national parks on the walls, his field journal on the desk where he'd sketched birds and plants they'd seen on hikes. The kitchen had the same Formica countertops from 1985, the same porcelain sink with the chip near the drain. The basement had boxes of Christmas decorations, old tax returns, broken things Robert kept meaning to fix. The attic held her grandfather's old steamer trunk with his journals and tools from the homestead. Things she'd inherited but rarely looked at. This was her life at 62, predictable, stable, so familiar she'd stopped seeing it clearly. The way you stop noticing wallpaper you've looked at for 40 years. She didn't know that everything was about to end, that the life she'd built so carefully, so quietly, was about to collapse like a house with rotted beams, that within 6 months she'd lose everything that defined her. That she'd have to answer the question her grandfather had posed decades ago. Was she stronger than she thought? The mountains stood on the horizon, same as always, waiting. The foothills held valleys and ridges she and Michael had explored, places where the cell phone reception died and the modern world fell away, places where a person could disappear if they wanted to, places where someone could start over if they had the will. But Corinne didn't know she'd need those places yet. She was still living her ordinary life, driving to school, teaching multiplication tables, coming home to a quiet house and a quieter marriage. She was still sleeping in a bed where her husband lay beside her like a stranger. She was still believing that this was enough, that this was what life looked like at 62. She was still a woman who didn't know who she really was underneath all the roles she played. That discovery was coming, but it would cost her everything first. The last good day, the last day before everything changed, was a Saturday in early October. The leaves were turning gold and red against the evergreens. Corinne and Michael drove up to the foothills for one of their hikes. the same trails they'd been walking since he was 6 years old. The air smelled like pine and dry earth. They saw a doe and her fawn near the creek. Michael found a hawk feather and added it to his collection. They ate sandwiches sitting on a fallen log, talking about his plans for college, about the future he was building. "Promise me something, Mom," he said, squinting in the afternoon sun. "Promise you'll keep exploring, even when I'm gone. Don't let yourself get stuck." She'd laughed, not understanding the weight of what he was asking. "Where would I go without my hiking partner? I'm serious." He'd looked at her with those earnest brown eyes that still held some boyishness despite his 19 years. "You love the mountains more than anything. Don't stop coming here just because I'm not around." "I promise," she'd said, not knowing it would become the most important promise she'd ever make. They drove home as the sun set behind the peaks, the truck radio playing soft country music, comfortable silence between them. She dropped him off at the house. He was heading to a friend's place to watch a game, then staying overnight. He hugged her goodbye, said he'd see her tomorrow. That was the last time she saw her son alive. The phone call came at 5:47 a.m. on Sunday morning. Corinne was already awake, making coffee, watching the sky lighten through the kitchen window. The ring cut through the quiet like a knife. She picked up, heard a voice identify itself as state police, heard words that didn't make sense at first. "Accident. Highway 20. Rain. We're sorry." Michael had been driving back from his friend's house in the early morning hours. Another driver, drunk, crossed the center line. Michael died on impact. The other driver walked away with scratches. Everything after that moment became fractured, surreal. Identifying his body at the hospital, his face peaceful, like he was sleeping but cold, when she touched his cheek. Robert standing beside her, silent, face gray. The funeral 3 days later, the whole town turning out because everyone knew the Yates family, because Michael had been a good kid, because tragedy in a small town became everyone's tragedy. Corinne stood at the graveside in her black dress, holding a rose, watching them lower her only child into the ground. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The grief was too big, too overwhelming. It sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and cold, stealing her breath. Robert stood beside her, not touching her, not speaking. The minister said words about God's plan and eternal peace. None of it meant anything. At the reception afterward, people brought casseroles and said things meant to comfort. "He's in a better place. Time heals all wounds. At least he didn't suffer." Corinne nodded and thanked them and felt like she was watching it all happen to someone else. Paula Drummond held her hand. Sheriff Ben Holloway gave his condolences with tears in his eyes. Tommy Brenner couldn't even speak, just hugged her and walked away. Through it all, Robert remained distant, present but absent. They drove home in silence. They walked into a house that still smelled like their son, his cologne in the bathroom, his jacket on the coat rack, his coffee mug in the dish drainer. Corinne went to his room and sat on his bed, and finally the tears came, wrenching sobs that emptied her out until she had nothing left. That's where the comfortable, ordinary life ended. That's where Corinne Yates, teacher, wife, mother, began to disappear piece by piece, until she'd have to decide what remained when everything else was gone. The 3 months after Michael's funeral passed in a fog. Corinne returned to teaching because she didn't know what else to do, standing in front of her classroom like an automaton, going through the motions while feeling hollow inside. Her students sensed something was different about Mrs. Yates. She still smiled, still helped them with their work, but the warmth had gone out of her eyes. She was there but not there. At home, the silence between her and Robert deepened into something unbearable. They moved around each other like ghosts, occupying the same space but not connecting. Robert spent longer hours at the mill, came home late, ate dinner in front of the television. Corinne spent evenings in Michael's room, sitting among his things, reading his field journal, trying to feel close to him. Then one morning in January, Robert came downstairs while Corinne was making coffee. He sat at the kitchen table, not looking at her, and said 5 words that ended their marriage. "I can't do this anymore." She turned from the counter, coffee pot in hand. "Can't do what?" "This us. I can't look at you without seeing him." His voice was flat, empty. I can't be in this house. I can't pretend we're going to get through this together." Corinne set down the coffee pot carefully, her hands steady despite the trembling in her chest. "We lost our son, Robert. We're supposed to help each other." "I know." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were dead. "But I don't know how. Every time I see you, I remember that morning. The phone call, the hospital. I can't breathe in this house anymore. So what are you saying?" "I filed for divorce last week. Papers should arrive this week." He stood up, grabbed his coat. "I'm staying at Bill's place. My lawyer will contact you." He walked out. Just like that. 30 years of marriage ending with the sound of the front door closing. Corinne stood in the kitchen as the coffee maker gurgled, the morning sun streaming through the window, the house creaking around her. She felt nothing. The grief over Michael had been so enormous that this new loss barely registered. It was like being told your house was on fire while you were already drowning. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. She signed them without reading them carefully, without fighting. What was the point? Robert was right. They'd been held together by their son, and without him there was nothing left. She'd known it for years, but had been too comfortable, too conflict-averse to name it. Robert moved out completely in February, taking half the furniture, leaving gaps in the house like missing teeth. Corinne continued teaching, continued existing, continued wondering what the point of any of it was. Then in March, the foreclosure notice arrived. She stood at the mailbox in the cold spring rain, staring at the official envelope from the bank. Inside, legal language explained that the mortgage hadn't been paid in 4 months. That Robert had stopped making payments when he moved out, that she had 30 days to bring the account current or the house would enter foreclosure proceedings. Corinne walked back inside, water dripping from her coat, the notice heavy in her hands. She called the bank, learned the amount owed was more than she could pay even if she emptied her savings. She called Robert, got voicemail, left a message that went unreturned. She called a lawyer, learned that since Robert's name was on the mortgage and he'd moved out, his obligation had ended. The house was in both their names, but the debt was now hers alone. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Robert had ended their marriage, the same table where Michael had done homework and eaten cereal and made her laugh with terrible jokes, and realized she was going to lose everything. The house, the life, the identity she'd built over 40 years. It was all disappearing like water through her fingers. That night she went up to the attic. She opened her grandfather's old steamer trunk, something she hadn't done in years. Inside were his journals from the homestead, written in fading ink, full of practical knowledge about building and surviving and making a life from nothing. There were old tools, a good knife, a hand axe, a leather tool roll. There were sketches he'd made of his cabin, his garden, his smokehouse. She sat on the attic floor, dust motes floating in the dim light from the bare bulb, and read his words from 1953. Started with nothing but land and will. Built shelter first. Wood is free if you work for it. Water is free if you know where to look. A person can live on very little if they're willing to do what needs doing. Corinne closed the journal and looked around the attic at the accumulated debris of her life. Boxes of Christmas decorations for holidays she'd never celebrate the same way again. Old clothes that didn't fit. Broken furniture waiting for repairs that would never come. All this stuff, and none of it mattered. None of it could bring back Michael or fix her marriage or save this house. What did matter? She went downstairs to Michael's room, opened his closet and found his hiking pack, the good one they'd bought him for his 18th birthday. It still smelled faintly like him, like pine trees and teenage boy in the outdoors. She unzipped the front pocket and found his brass compass, the one she'd given him when he was 12. It was old, had been her grandfather's, the glass face scratched but the needle still true. She sat on his bed holding the compass and remembered that last hike. His words, "Promise you'll keep exploring, don't let yourself get stuck." In that moment, sitting in her dead son's room, in a house she was losing, divorced from a man who couldn't stand to look at her, Corinne made a decision. She couldn't stay here. Couldn't keep teaching children while dying inside. Couldn't keep living in this town where everyone knew her story. where every face held pity, where every street corner held memories of the life that was gone. She could fight the foreclosure, probably delay it a few months. She could keep working, keep pretending, keep slowly suffocating in the ruins of her old life, or she could leave. The idea should have seemed crazy. A 62-year-old woman walking away from everything, disappearing into the mountains like some character from a book. But it didn't feel crazy. It felt like the first clear thought she'd had in months. She spent the next 2 weeks methodically preparing. She sold what furniture remained, got a few $1,000s. She closed her bank accounts, withdrew everything in cash. She went through the house, sorting what mattered from what didn't. In the end, what mattered fit in Michael's hiking pack. Some clothes, her grandfather's journals and knife, Michael's compass and field journal, a tarp, a water filter, basic supplies. She went to Tommy Brenner's hardware store on a Wednesday afternoon. He greeted her with concern in his eyes. "Mrs. Yates, how are you holding up?" "I need an axe, Tommy, a good one. Something that'll last." He showed her several options, recommended one with a hickory handle and a sharp blade, already broken in but plenty of life left. She bought it along with a whetstone, a coil of rope, and a box of waterproof matches. Tommy rang her up, studying her face. "You planning some project?" "Something like that." She paid in cash. "Thank you, Tommy, for everything. You're a good man." Something in her tone made him pause. "Mrs. Yates, take care of yourself." She picked up her purchases and walked out, knowing it was the last time she'd see him. On a Friday in April, Corinne Yates put her house keys on the bank counter and walked out. She'd left no note, no explanation. Her mailbox was full. Her phone went straight to voicemail. She took the truck to the edge of town, parked it at the trailhead where she and Michael had hiked dozens of times, and left the keys in the ignition with the title on the dashboard. She shouldered Michael's pack, picked up the axe, and started walking into the mountains. Behind her lay everything she'd been. Ahead lay only wilderness and possibility, and the question of who she'd become. Most people assumed she'd gone off to die. That grief had finally broken her completely. But standing at that trailhead, breathing in the pine-scented air, feeling the weight of the pack on her shoulders and the solid handle of the axe in her hand, Corinne felt more alive than she had in months. She was 62 years old, alone and walking into the wild with nothing but what she could carry. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. The first day was harder than Corinne expected. Her body, 62 years old and softened by decades of desk work and short weekend hikes, protested every step. The pack that had felt manageable in the parking lot grew heavier with each mile. Her feet developed blisters within the first 2 hours, despite good boots and wool socks. Her shoulders ached where the straps dug in, but she kept walking. She followed trails she knew, paths she'd walked with Michael over the years. Past the lightning-struck pine where they'd once seen a black bear, around the ridge where wildflowers bloomed in summer, through the valley where the creek ran cold and clear. She was heading deeper into the foothills, away from the maintained trails, toward the remote areas where hikers rarely went. By evening of the first day, she'd covered maybe 6 miles. Not much for a younger person, but her legs trembled with exhaustion. She found a flat spot near the creek, dropped her pack, and sat on a fallen log with her head in her hands. Every muscle hurt. Her back screamed. The blisters on her heels burned. What was she doing out here? She forced herself to stand, to unpack the tarp and string it between trees for basic shelter. Her hands remembered the knots her grandfather had taught her, even if they fumbled with stiff fingers. She gathered firewood, coaxed a flame to life with the waterproof matches, heated water from the creek in her small pot, ate a protein bar and instant oatmeal, bland but filling. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, she sat by the fire wrapped in her jacket and sleeping bag, listening to the night sounds. Owls calling, the creek murmuring, wind in the pines. She'd loved these sounds on weekend camping trips. But now, alone and committed to this choice, they felt different. Vast, indifferent to whether she lived or died out here. She pulled out Michael's compass, watched the needle point north in the firelight. opened his field journal, saw his handwriting describing a cedar waxwing they'd spotted last summer. Her throat tightened. She closed the journal carefully and put it away. "I'm keeping my promise, kiddo," she whispered to the darkness. "I'm exploring. I'm not stuck anymore." The first night was cold and uncomfortable, the ground hard beneath the tarp, strange noises making sleep difficult. But when dawn broke and sunlight filtered through the trees, Corinne was still there. Still alive. Still moving forward. Day 2 and 3 blurred together. More walking, deeper into the wilderness. Her body adjusted slowly, the initial agony settling into steady discomfort. She rationed her food carefully, supplemented with edible plants she recognized, dandelion greens, wild onions, miner's lettuce. She caught a small trout in the creek using line and a bent pin, cooked it over the fire, felt absurdly proud of the meal. On day 4, she found it. The clearing. It sat in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by ridge lines, open to the south for sun. A creek ran along the eastern edge, clear and strong, even this early in spring. Old-growth trees provided timber. The land was relatively flat, maybe 2 acres of usable space. Most importantly, it was far from any maintained trail, hidden, a place where someone could live unseen. She knew this area. She and Michael had hiked near here years ago, though they'd never found this exact spot. It was at least 8 miles from the nearest trailhead, rough terrain, the kind of distance that kept casual hikers away. Corinne dropped her pack and walked the perimeter slowly. The clearing felt right, protected but not claustrophobic. Access to water, southern exposure for a garden, enough timber to build, game trails at the edges, suggesting deer and elk pass through. This could work. She made camp that night with a different feeling in her chest. Not quite hope, too soon for that, but something like purpose. For the first time since Michael's death, she had a goal beyond just getting through the day. She would build something here. She would survive. The next morning she began, first priority, better shelter. The tarp had been fine for traveling but wouldn't work long-term. She remembered her grandfather's journals, his descriptions of building his first lean-to, simple construction, logs notched and stacked against a rock face or sturdy trees, roof of bark and branches, chimney hole for smoke. She found a good spot at the base of a granite outcropping on the north side of the clearing. The rock provided natural backing and would retain heat from a fire. Using the axe Tommy Brenner had sold her, bless him for recommending a good one, she began felling small trees. Alders first, since they were easier to work with and grew thick in this area. The work was brutally hard. Her arms burned with each swing of the axe. Her hands, unused to this kind of labor, blistered and then bled. She had to rest frequently, drinking water from the creek, catching her breath. A younger person could have felled a dozen trees in the time it took her to drop 3. But she kept working. She learned quickly to let the axe's weight do most of the work. To aim for the same spot with each swing, to work with the grain of the wood. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Tool does the work if you let it. You just guide it." By the end of the first week, she had a dozen trees down and delimbed. Not much but a start. Her hands were raw, despite attempts to wrap them. Her shoulders ached constantly. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging looser. But when she looked at the small pile of logs, something fierce and satisfied rose in her chest. She was building this, with her own hands. At 62, alone, the clearing began to feel like home. She learned its rhythms, where the sun hit first in the morning, where shadows fell in the afternoon, how the wind moved through at evening. She saw a fox one dawn, rust-red coat bright against the green. It watched her for a long moment before vanishing into the underbrush. She saw it again 2 days later, decided to call it Russet, talking to it while she worked. "Morning, Russet. Just me out here cutting wood. You're not scared of me, are you? Good. I'm not here to hurt anything. Just trying to live." Talking aloud helped with the loneliness. Corinne had always been comfortable with silence, but this was different. Days without hearing another human voice, without any voice but her own. So she narrated her work, spoke to the trees and the fox and the creek. filled the air with words to remind herself she was real, she existed, she mattered. She found the ruins of an old structure at the far edge of the clearing in the second week. Just a collapsed pile of weathered logs, barely recognizable as having once been a cabin. She kicked through the debris carefully, found some old square nails, a rusted coffee pot, pieces of what might have been a wood stove. Someone had lived here before, long ago. Had they survived, thrived, or had the wilderness taken them? She salvaged what she could. The nails, some boards that weren't completely rotted, an old saw blade with some teeth still good. Every resource mattered out here. By the end of her second week, Corinne had a basic lean-to structure taking shape. 8 feet deep, 6 feet wide, logs stacked and notched, roof starting to form. It wasn't pretty, but it would keep the rain off. She built a fire pit properly this time, ringed with stones from the creek, positioned where smoke would vent away from the shelter. Her body had changed. Muscles she didn't know she had ached constantly. Her hands were calloused, nails broken and dirty. Her face was sunburned, her hair tangled. She looked nothing like Mrs. Yates, the third-grade teacher. She looked like a woman who was fighting to survive. She looked, she thought, catching her reflection in the creek like someone who might actually make it. Week 3 brought rain, and Corinne learned just how inadequate her shelter really was. Water found every gap in the roof, dripped through onto her sleeping bag, turned the dirt floor to mud. She spent a miserable night huddled in the driest corner, listening to the storm hammer the mountains, shivering and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But morning came, as it always did. She dragged herself outside, assessed the damage, and got back to work. She needed to weatherproof the roof properly. That meant bark. Thick slabs of cedar bark overlapped like shingles. She spent 2 days collecting it from dead trees, layering it carefully, securing it with more branches and stones. The next rain, the shelter held. Corinne lay in her sleeping bag, dry and warm, listening to water drum overhead, and felt a satisfaction deeper than anything she'd felt in months. She'd identified a problem and solved it. No one had helped her. She'd done it herself. Her days developed a rhythm. Wake with the sun, usually around 6. Start the fire, boil water for instant coffee, one of the few luxuries she'd brought. Eat something simple, then work, always work. Building, improving, gathering. The shelter needed walls, needed to be more than just a lean-to if she was going to survive winter. She continued felling trees, dragging logs, notching and stacking. Around midday, she'd stop for lunch and foraging. The forest provided if you knew where to look. Dandelions were everywhere, leaves bitter but nutritious. Wild onions grew near the creek. She found a patch of miner's lettuce and harvested it carefully, leaving enough to regrow. She caught fish when she could, supplementing her dwindling supply of dried food. Afternoons meant more building or necessary tasks. Gathering firewood, washing clothes in the creek, maintaining tools, sharpening the axe, organizing supplies. She made a workbench from salvaged boards, built a frame to dry fish over the fire, constructed a simple latrine away from the water source. Evenings she spent near the fire, too exhausted to do much else. She'd write in Michael's field journal, continuing his observations of the natural world. She documented what she saw, birds, plants, weather patterns. She sketched rough maps of the area. She recorded her progress on the shelter. Writing helped organize her thoughts, helped her process what she was doing out here. The journal became a conversation with her son, a way to feel he was still part of this journey. Day 23, she wrote. Got the roof waterproofed today. You would have laughed at me dancing in the rain to test it, but it held. I'm learning that the best feeling in the world might just be solving a problem with your own hands. Remember when we built that birdhouse in your scout troop? You were so proud when the chickadees moved in. I get it now. I really get it. The physical work was transforming her body. She could feel it. Muscles hardening in her arms and shoulders, her wind improving from the constant walking and lifting. She'd lost weight, probably 15 pounds, but it was soft weight, leaving her leaner and stronger. Her hands were completely calloused now. The blisters healed into toughness, but the transformation wasn't just physical. Something was shifting in her mind, in how she thought about herself. For 40 years, she'd been defined by her roles: teacher, wife, mother. Those identities had been stripped away. Out here alone, she was just Corinne, just a woman trying to survive. And slowly, painfully, she was discovering that maybe that was enough. Maybe she was enough on her own. In the 6th week, she expanded the shelter into a proper cabin. She'd been reading her grandfather's journals by firelight, studying his sketches, understanding his methods. The cabin didn't need to be big. She was just one person. 8 feet by 10 feet would be sufficient. 4 walls, a proper roof, a door, a window opening that could be covered with a hide or cloth. She worked steadily, methodically. Fell trees, stripped bark, notched logs, stacked walls. It was slow, exhausting work. Some days, she only managed to add 1 or 2 logs. But the structure grew, inch by inch, taking shape. She found herself talking more to the forest, to Russet the fox who still visited, to Michael. "You seeing this, kid? Your old mom building a cabin like some pioneer woman? Your grandfather would be proud. Hell, I'm proud. 62 years old and I'm doing this." The talking wasn't madness, she decided. It was human. People were meant to use language to communicate. Out here alone, she had to create her own conversation or risk losing that part of herself. By week 8, the cabin had 4 walls and a roof. No door yet, just an opening, but it was shelter. Real shelter. She moved her supplies inside, set up her sleeping bag on a platform of boards salvaged from the ruins, built a small fireplace in one corner with stones from the creek, creating a chimney with clay and sticks. It wasn't perfect. Smoke still leaked into the cabin sometimes, but it worked. She stood outside one evening, looking at what she'd built, and felt tears on her cheeks. Not sad tears, something else. Pride, relief, gratitude. She wasn't sure. Maybe all of it. Spring was progressing towards summer. The days grew longer and warmer. Wildflowers bloomed in the clearing. She prepared a garden plot near the cabin, working the soil with a digging stick, adding leaf mulch to enrich it. She had some seeds, beans, squash, carrots, salvaged from her supplies. She planted them carefully, watered them from the creek, hoped they'd grow. The garden felt important beyond just food. It was a commitment to staying, to building a future here. You didn't plant a garden if you were planning to leave next week. She found the natural clay deposit in her 9th week, exposed on a creek bank after a heavy rain. She recognized it from her grandfather's journals, good clay, the kind you could work with. She dug some out, brought it back to camp, experimented with forming it. Made a crude bowl, let it dry in the sun, fired it carefully in her fire. It wasn't pretty, but it held water. She made more, bowls, a simple cup, a plate. Pottery meant she could store food better, carry water more easily. Every small improvement felt like victory. Every skill relearned or discovered felt like proof she could do this, could survive, could build a life from nothing. But the loneliness was real too. There were days when she missed conversation, missed laughter, missed being touched by another human. Days when the silence felt oppressive rather than peaceful. Days when she wondered if anyone in Millbrook thought about her, wondered where she'd gone. She imagined they'd stopped looking by now, assumed she'd died in the mountains, killed by exposure or injury or despair. In a way, maybe they were right. The Corinne Yates who taught 3rd grade and lived on Maple Street was dead. The woman building a cabin in the wilderness was someone else entirely. Someone stronger, someone she was just beginning to know. On a clear night in late May, nearly 2 months into her new life, Corinne sat by the fire and looked up at the stars. So many more visible here than in town. She thought about Michael, about Robert, about the life she'd left behind. She still grieved. That hadn't gone away, but the grief had changed. It no longer consumed her. It had become part of her, woven into everything else, the work, the solitude, the survival. "I'm still here," she said to the stars, to Michael, to herself. "I'm still here and I'm building something. I don't know what it means yet, but I'm doing it. And that's enough for now." Summer settled over the mountains, with long, warm days and cool nights. Corinne's garden sprouted, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil, reaching towards sun. She tended it carefully, pulling weeds, checking for pests, watering during dry spells. The beans climbed stakes she'd made from saplings. The squash spread leaves like green hands. The carrots sent up feathery tops. Watching things grow felt healing in a way she hadn't expected. Life continuing, things beginning. She'd planted these seeds not knowing if they'd survive, and here they were, thriving. Her cabin was functional now, though still primitive. She'd built a proper door from split logs, hung on leather hinges made from a deer hide. The hide had come from a carcass she'd found, killed by a mountain lion, most of the meat gone, but the hide salvageable. She'd scraped and tanned it using methods from her grandfather's journal, a process that took weeks, but gave her material for hinges, a door covering. Possible clothing repairs later. She carved a simple sign from a flat piece of cedar, burned letters into it with a heated knife, Stillwater Haven, named for the creek that ran steady and clear, the still water that reflected sky and trees. Haven because that's what it was becoming, a refuge, a sanctuary, a home. She mounted the sign on a post near the cabin, a declaration, a claiming of this space as hers, but the work was far from finished. As summer progressed, and she thought ahead to winter, a winter she'd never experienced out here, Corinne realized she needed more. More food stored, better insulation, a reliable heat source. If she was going to survive the mountain winter alone, she needed to prepare seriously. She built a smokehouse using techniques from her grandfather's journal, a small structure with green wood that would produce cool smoke for preserving fish. She caught trout regularly now, becoming skilled with simple tackle. The smoked fish would keep for months, protein for the lean times ahead. She expanded her foraging range, creating a mental map of resources. Berry patches that would ripen in late summer, nut trees that would drop food in fall, edible root plants, medicinal herbs, yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain, mint for digestion. She made notes in Michael's journal, turning it into a survival guide for this specific place. On a warm July morning, she encountered her first human since disappearing. She was checking a fish trap in the creek, early enough that mist still clung to the water when she heard movement in the brush. She froze, hand reaching automatically for the knife at her belt. A man emerged from the trees, old, maybe 75, weathered like driftwood, carrying a pack and walking stick. He stopped when he saw her, surprise crossing his lined face. "Well now, didn't expect to find anyone this far out." Corinne straightened slowly, keeping her distance. "I could say the same." He studied her with sharp eyes. "You living out here?" "I am. Alone?" "Yes." He nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Name's Vernon. Old Vernon, most call me. Been trapping these mountains for near 50 years. He gestured at the clearing behind her. "That your cabin?" "It is. Built it yourself?" "Yes." He let out a low whistle. "That's something. You been out here long?" "Few months." Vernon looked at her more carefully, taking in her lean frame, sun-darkened skin, capable hands. "Running from something or running to something?" The question was direct but not unkind. Corinne considered how to answer. "Both, maybe." He nodded again. "That's usually how it goes." "Well, I won't pry." "Just passing through, checking my trap lines." "But since I'm here, you need anything? Supplies, information?" "I'm managing." "I can see that." He scratched his beard. "Tell you what, though. Winter's coming, and it's brutal up here. You're going to want chickens if you can manage it. Fresh eggs all winter. I've got some birds I could trade. You got anything worth trading?" Corinne thought. "I have some smoked fish. Clay bowls. I could make more. Bowls would work. My old ones keep breaking." Vernon shifted his pack. "I'll be back through in 2 weeks. Bring 3 birds if you've got 6 good bowls ready." Fair." He touched his hat brim. "You be careful out here, ma'am. Bears get bold in fall. Keep your food stored high and tight." He started to leave, then turned back. "Anyone asks, I didn't see you. Your business is your business." "Thank you, Vernon." He waved and disappeared into the trees, leaving Corinne standing by the creek, heart pounding. Human contact. Brief but real. He hadn't judged her, hadn't asked questions she didn't want to answer, hadn't treated her like she was crazy. Just accepted that she was here, offered practical help, moved on. She spent the next 2 weeks making bowls, her best work. When Vernon returned, true to his word, she traded 6 bowls for 3 hens, red and brown, healthy birds that clucked nervously in the makeshift crate he'd carried them in. "They're good layers," he told her. "Keep them fed and safe, they'll give you eggs through winter. You'll need a coop, though. Something secure against predators." She built the coop over the next week. Another structure, another project, another skill learned. The chickens settled in, began laying within days. Fresh eggs, real protein. She felt absurdly grateful to these birds, named them Henny, Penny, and Ruby. "You don't know how lucky you are," she told them while collecting eggs one morning. "Living here at Stillwater Haven, full board, protection, all you have to do is lay eggs." Not a bad deal, talking to chickens. She'd definitely been alone too long, but it helped, having living creatures around, even if they were just birds. As summer faded toward autumn, Corinne began thinking beyond immediate survival. She'd proven she could build shelter, find food, live out here alone. But what was the point of it all? Was she just going to exist in isolation until she died? One evening, reading by firelight, she found a passage in her grandfather's journal from 1955. "Been out here 5 years now. Built a good life. But it feels hollow sometimes, just me and the land. People are meant to be together, I think. Meant to help each other. I'm going to start helping folks who come through, offer them a meal and a bed, share what I've learned. What's the point of knowledge if you die with it?" The words struck something deep in Corinne. She thought about her 40 years of teaching, how much satisfaction she'd found in helping children learn and grow. She thought about Vernon, offering chickens and advice, asking nothing except a fair trade. She thought about Josephine. Wait, who was Josephine? The thought came from nowhere, a name she didn't recognize, but it felt important somehow, like something waiting to be discovered. The autumn colors began to show, aspens turning gold, maples going red. The nights grew cold enough for frost. Corinne harvested her garden, beans, squash, carrots, more than she'd expected. She stored everything carefully, built a root cellar by digging into the hillside, lining it with stones. She reinforced her cabin against winter, chinked gaps with clay and moss, added a second layer of bark to the roof, built up her woodpile until it was higher than the cabin itself. She made warmer clothes by sewing together rabbit hides. She smoked more fish, dried berries, made sure she had enough food stored to survive months of snow. But through all the preparation, that question nagged. What was the point? Was she building Stillwater Haven just for herself? Or was it meant to be something more? She didn't have an answer yet, but she felt like one was coming, like the mountains were holding secrets she hadn't discovered yet. Like her story here wasn't finished, wasn't just about one woman surviving alone. Like maybe, just maybe, she was building something that mattered beyond her own survival. Winter came hard and early that year. The first serious snow fell in late October, blanketing the clearing in white, transforming Stillwater Haven into something from a storybook. Corinne stood in her doorway, wrapped in a blanket made from sewn-together hides, watching the flakes fall thick and silent. She was ready. Wood stacked high, food stored, cabins sealed against the cold. The chickens had an insulated coop with thick bedding. She'd survived the summer and fall. Now came the real test. The isolation of winter was different from the isolation of warmer months. Then she could move around, explore, stay busy with constant outdoor work. Now storms kept her inside for days at a time. The world shrank to her cabin, her fire, her thoughts. She spent those long hours reading her grandfather's journals more carefully, studying every detail. He'd homesteaded for 23 years before health forced him back to civilization. He'd built not just a cabin, but a whole life. Barn, smokehouse, root cellar, everything needed for self-sufficiency. He'd written about the philosophy of it, not just the technique. Day 4872, one entry read, "Asked myself today why I'm still out here. Could go back to town, live easier, see people. But I realized this isn't about easier. It's about real. Out here, everything matters. Every action has direct consequence. You build a bad roof, you get wet. You don't store enough food, you go hungry. There's an honesty to it that civilization loses. Your life is in your own hands. That's freedom most folks never know. Corinne understood completely. In her old life, consequences were always distant, abstract. You showed up to work, you got paid. You bought food at the store. You flipped a switch, lights came on. Out here, she was directly connected to her survival. The fire she built kept her warm. The food she'd gathered kept her alive. The shelter she'd constructed protected her. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. It was the most alive she'd ever felt, but the philosophical clarity didn't make winter easy. There were hard days, days when her body ached with cold despite the fire, days when cabin fever made her want to scream, days when she missed human conversation so badly she talked to herself for hours just to hear words. She worked on projects to stay busy and sane. She carved utensils from wood, spoons, bowls, plates. She made rope from plant fibers. Tedious work that took concentration. She tanned more hides, building up materials for future projects. She drew in Michael's journal, sketching the cabin, the clearing, the mountains, trying to capture the beauty she saw even in the harsh season, and she began to plan. During those long winter evenings, with nothing to do but think, Corinne started imagining Stillwater Haven's future. She'd built enough for one person, but what if it could be more? What if it could help others the way the mountains had helped her? She thought about people like herself, broken by loss, needing to escape, wanting to start over but not knowing how. People who'd hit bottom and needed a place to land, to breathe, to rebuild. The mountains had given her that. Could Stillwater Haven do the same for others? The idea grew in her mind like seeds in spring soil. A refuge, a place where people could come when life had taken everything. Not a business, not a resort, just a shelter. Temporary, like she'd needed. A space to heal and figure out next steps. She began sketching plans in the margins of the journal. A second cabin for guests. Better water collection. Expanded gardens. A system that could support more than just her. It would take years to build, but what else did she have but time? Spring came slowly. Snow melting in patches, green gradually returning. Corinne emerged from winter thinner, but tougher, ready to work again. She'd survived. That first winter alone in the mountains, and she'd survived. She expanded the garden significantly, preparing to grow enough food for more than just herself. She started collecting materials for a second structure, logs, stones, clay. She didn't know when anyone would come, if anyone would come, but she'd be ready when they did. Vernon appeared again in late April, materializing from the trees like a ghost. He looked older, moved stiffer, but his eyes were still sharp. Made it through winter, I see. He studied her. The improved cabin, the expanded garden plot. You've been busy. Had to stay busy or go crazy. He nodded, understanding. Mind if I sit a spell? Old bones don't walk as good as they used to. They sat by her fire, sharing coffee she'd traded for on Vernon's last visit. He told her about the trap line, about mountain lions he'd seen, about weather patterns and what they meant for the coming year. Easy conversation between two people, comfortable with silence. Finally, he said, "You planning to stay out here permanent?" "I am. Good land for it. Hidden, protected, water close." He paused. "You know, you remind me of someone. Woman named Josephine lived out here way back. Must have been the late 40s, early 50s. She had a homestead, not far from here, actually." Corinne's breath caught. That name again. What happened to her? Built herself a good life. Helped people, from what I heard. Women mostly, ones who needed to get away from bad situations. Eventually left to help her daughter with grandkids. Always meant to come back, but never did. Cancer got her. Vernon looked around the clearing. I think this might have been near where she lived. These mountains hide things good, though. Odd to know for sure. Do you know exactly where? He scratched his beard. There's old ruins half-mile northwest. Collapsed cabin, all overgrown now. Might have been hers. Might not. Memory is not what it was. After Vernon left, Corinne spent the next day searching. She'd seen ruins on the edge of her clearing, had salvaged materials from them. But northwest, she hadn't explored that direction carefully. She found it in the late afternoon. More ruins, more extensive than the ones near her cabin. The logs were rotted, collapsed, but she could see the layout. A main cabin larger than hers. what might have been a second structure. Stone foundation work that showed careful planning. And fruit trees, old and gnarled but still alive, growing wild among the rubble. Someone had lived here. Built here. Maybe this Josephine. Corinne picked through the ruins carefully, looking for anything that might have survived. Most was too far gone. Wood returned to earth, metal rusted beyond recognition. But then, in what must have been the main cabin under rotted floorboards, she found it. A metal box, rusted but sealed. She pried it open carefully. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather journal. She carried it back to her cabin like treasure, waited until evening, then opened it by firelight. The first page, in careful handwriting, property of Josephine Hartley. 1947. Corinne began to read, and everything changed. Josephine Hartley's journal was revelation and mirror both. The first entries were dated April 1947. Left Millbrook today, she'd written. Couldn't stay in that town another day, not with everyone whispering, judging, treating me like I'd committed murder just for leaving my husband. Harold was a drunk and mean with it. I stayed 20 years, buried 2 children who didn't make it past infancy. Finally got the courage to leave and the town turned on me. A woman's supposed to endure, they say, supposed to suffer quietly. Well, I'm done suffering. Got my divorce, took what little money I had, walked into these mountains where nobody would follow. Corinne's hands trembled holding the journal. The parallels. A woman from Millbrook, a woman fleeing judgment and loss, a woman who chose the mountains over the alternative. She kept reading. Josephine had found this same area, had built in almost the exact spot Corinne had chosen. The entries detailed similar struggles, the physical exhaustion, the loneliness, the slow building of shelter and life. But Josephine had succeeded, had stayed for 5 years, had built something substantial. Then, a year in, the entries shifted. June 1948. Found a woman near my camp today. Young thing, maybe 25, beat up badly. She'd run from somewhere, wouldn't say where at first. Gave her food and shelter. Took 3 days before she told me husband in Bellingham beat her near to death. She'd escaped, hiked into mountains, got lost. She stayed 2 weeks while she healed. When she left, she said I'd saved her life. Made me think, maybe that's why I'm here. Maybe I can help others like me, women who need somewhere to hide, to heal, to figure out what comes next. The journal became a record of others. Over the next 4 years, Josephine had quietly helped 17 women. Some stayed days, some weeks. She'd built a second cabin for them, had established what she called a refuge for the lost and found. She'd connected with sympathetic people in nearby towns who'd discreetly send women who needed help. There were photographs, tucked into the journal pages, faded black and white images, showing Josephine standing with other women in front of the cabins. Josephine was tall, raw-boned, with fierce eyes and a determined set to her jaw. The other women varied, young, old, all wearing expressions that mixed trauma with tentative hope. Letters were folded between pages, too. Thank you notes from women who'd stayed. You gave me my life back. I'm safe now because of you. My daughter will never know the fear I lived with. Because you helped me escape. One letter, dated 1952, was from Josephine herself, unsent to whoever finds this place after I'm gone, and someone will eventually. These mountains have a way of calling to those who need them. If you found this, you probably needed to disappear too. That's all right. That's what this place is for. I'm leaving because my daughter needs me. Her husband died, left her with 3 kids and no money. I have to go help. But I always meant to come back here, to keep doing this work. Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. If I don't, I hope you'll carry it forward. Help those who need helping. Give shelter to those who need sheltering. That's what these mountains are for, refuge. Remember that. Corinne sat back, journal in her lap, fire crackling. She wasn't the first. This place had always been a haven. Josephine had seen what she was only now beginning to understand, that the mountains could give what civilization couldn't. Space, peace, a chance to start over. She spent the next 3 days reading every word, studying the photographs, absorbing Josephine's story. She learned practical things too. Josephine had documented her building techniques, her methods for food preservation, her solutions to problems. It was like having a mentor across time, advice from someone who'd walked this path before, but more than that, it was validation. Corinne wasn't crazy for being here, for building this. She was continuing something that mattered, something that had helped real people survive real trauma. She looked at the photograph of Josephine and the 3 women standing in front of the old cabin. 4 women who'd chosen to survive, to rebuild, to help each other. A chain of resilience stretching back 70 years. "I'll finish what you started," Corinne said to the photograph. "I promise," the decision crystallized. She would build Stillwater Haven into what Josephine had envisioned. A place of genuine refuge, not advertised, not public, but known to those who needed to know. A sanctuary for people at the end of their rope, a place to catch their breath and figure out what came next. She studied Josephine's notes about the network, people in nearby towns who'd helped discreetly. Some names she recognized. Vernon was mentioned. Old Vernon brings supplies, never asks questions, solid man. Others were probably gone now, but the principle remained. There were always people willing to help quietly, if you found the right ones. Corinne began planning seriously. She needed better structures. The guest cabin Josephine had built was gone, rotted away. She needed sustainable food production, larger gardens, maybe goats for milk, definitely more chickens. She needed systems, water collection, waste management, everything scaled up. It would take years, maybe the rest of her life. But what better way to spend her remaining years than building something that mattered? She worked through that summer and fall with renewed purpose. She salvaged everything useful from Josephine's ruins, the old stone foundation, intact parts of the chimney, square nails, any timber still solid. She began laying foundation for a proper guest cabin, using Josephine's design as a template, but improving based on her own experience. The work was immense. She was 65 now, feeling every year of it in her joints and back. But she kept going, stone by stone, log by log. She talked to Josephine while she worked, to Michael, to her grandfather, to the mountains themselves. "You built something good here, Josephine. I'm going to make it better, going to make sure it lasts, going to make sure others can find it when they need it." Vernon came through again in October, bringing winter supplies. He saw the expanded work, the new foundation, raised an eyebrow. "Building big," he observed. "Building for more than just me." He nodded slowly. Josephine used to say the same thing. "You know about her now." Found her journal, read every word. She was a good woman, helped a lot of people. Vernon looked at Corinne with something like approval. "Glad someone's picking up where she left off. World needs more of that. Will you help?" "Like you helped her?" "Already am, aren't I?" He smiled, gaps where teeth had been. "I'll keep quiet about this place, same as I did for her. And I'll send people your way if I meet any who need it. But discreet. Always discreet. Thank you, Vernon. Thank me by surviving another winter." "That cabin ready?" They spent the afternoon going over her preparations. Vernon gave advice based on decades of experience. When he left, he clasped her shoulder briefly. "You're doing something good here, Corinne. Don't give up on it." Winter came again, her second in the mountains. This time she was better prepared, more confident. She spent the long, dark months planning, documenting, preparing for spring work. She copied important parts of Josephine's journal into Michael's journal, combining their wisdom, creating a manual for survival and refuge. She wrote about her philosophy too, crystallizing her thoughts. This place isn't about running away. It's about having space to figure out who you are when everything else is stripped away. It's about learning you're stronger than you knew. It's about starting over, not because you failed, but because sometimes life breaks you down and you need to rebuild from the foundation up. Anyone who finds Stillwater Haven is welcome, but only if they're serious about the work. This isn't a vacation, it's a transformation. Come ready to face yourself. Come ready to work. Come ready to discover what you're really made of. Spring returned. Corinne emerged from winter and continued building. The guest cabin took shape. She established better trails, markers for those who might come. She expanded gardens, built a better smokehouse, improved every system. She was creating something permanent, something that would outlast her. A legacy, not for glory or recognition, but because it needed to exist. Because there would always be people like her, like Josephine, like the women in those photographs, people who needed the mountains to remember how to breathe. She carved a second sign, smaller than the main one. "You are welcome here. Rest, heal, begin again." She was ready. Stillwater Haven was becoming real, becoming what it was always meant to be. Now it was just a matter of time before someone found it, before the refuge served its purpose again. The mountains held the secret. Vernon kept it, and Corinne waited, building, preparing, knowing that when the time came, she'd be ready to help whoever needed what only Stillwater Haven could provide. Year 3 at Stillwater Haven began with purpose Corinne had never felt before. She was building something bigger than herself, carrying forward Josephine's legacy while making it her own. The guest cabin was nearly complete. Solid walls, good roof, a small wood stove she'd bartered for with clay pots and smoked fish. Simple furniture she'd made herself. A comfortable space for someone who needed refuge. But as she worked, a question nagged: should she make the place more visible or keep it hidden? Josephine had relied on a quiet network, people sending others discreetly. That had worked in the 1940s, but this was different times. Still, making Stillwater Haven too public risked the wrong kind of attention. Government interference, regulations, people treating it like a business rather than a sanctuary. She thought about it during long spring days, turning the problem over in her mind like a stone in her hand. Finally, she settled on a middle path. She'd make the place findable for those who truly needed it. Subtle trail markers, word passed quietly through the right people, but she wouldn't advertise. Those who were meant to find it would find it. She spent weeks creating a detailed map on a large piece of tanned hide, showing safe routes to Stillwater Haven from various trailheads. She marked water sources, landmarks, distances. Anyone with basic navigation skills could follow it. She made copies on paper too, planning to leave them with Vernon to distribute carefully. She wrote a guide for living at the Haven, documenting everything she'd learned. How to maintain the structures, where to find food in each season, how to use the tools, safety protocols, philosophy and expectations. She created a manual that would allow the place to function even after she was gone. "To whoever reads this," she wrote in the introduction, "Stillwater Haven exists because sometimes people need to disappear for a while. To heal, to figure things out, to remember who they are underneath all the damage life inflicts. You're welcome here, whether you stay a week or a year. But this isn't charity and it's not a vacation. You'll work for your keep. You'll maintain what's here. And you'll treat this place with respect, because it might save the next person's life the way it saved yours." She felt good about the words, clear, honest, the kind of straightforward communication that had served her well in the mountains. Meanwhile, back in Millbrook, though she didn't know it, her story had become local legend. Sheriff Ben Holloway had officially declared her missing, presumed deceased after a year with no contact. Paula Drummond still kept her mail, still hoped, but had mostly accepted she'd never see her friend again. Tommy Brenner told stories about the teacher who'd bought an axe and walked into the mountains. She just wanted peace, he'd say. Can't blame her. Lost her son, lost everything. Mountains gave her what the town couldn't, a place to be alone with her grief. Most people assumed she'd died within weeks. Exposure, injury, wildlife. The mountains had 1,000 ways to kill you. A few romantics thought she'd become some kind of hermit, living in a cave somewhere. No one imagined she'd built what she'd built, accomplished what she'd accomplished, and no one knew about Kyle Morrison. Kyle was 34, recently divorced, recently unemployed, recently evicted. Everything had collapsed within 6 months. His marriage ending, his company downsizing, his apartment lease expiring with no money for renewal. He'd moved back in with his parents, feeling like a failure, feeling like he'd wasted his entire adult life. He sat in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by high school trophies and old posters, and realized he couldn't breathe. Not metaphorically, he literally felt like he was suffocating. The walls were too close. His parents' well-meaning concern was smothering. The job applications going nowhere. The future blank and terrifying. He remembered happier times, camping trips in the Cascades with college friends before life got complicated. The peace he'd felt in the mountains. The clarity. He decided on impulse to do a solo hiking trip, clear his head, figure things out. His parents tried to talk him out of it. You're not in the right headspace. What if something happens? Maybe wait until things settle down, but Kyle needed to go. Needed space, needed to feel like he was doing something, even if that something was just walking into the wilderness alone. He prepared inadequately, too confident in skills he hadn't used in years, too distracted by his problems to properly plan. He packed enough food for 5 days, a decent tent and sleeping bag, basic first aid. But he didn't tell anyone his exact route, didn't bring a satellite phone, didn't really think through what he was doing. He drove to a trailhead in the Cascades, the same general area where Corinne had disappeared 3 years earlier, though he didn't know that. He parked, shouldered his pack and started walking. Away from his failure, away from judgment, towards something he couldn't name but desperately needed. Back at Stillwater Haven, Corinne finished the guest cabin in late August. She stood back looking at it with satisfaction. Solid construction, comfortable space. Ready for whoever might need it. She'd done everything she could to prepare. Food stores were good. Water systems worked. Both cabins were tight and warm. The chickens were laying reliably. The garden produced more than she could eat alone. She had medical supplies, basic but sufficient. She had tools, materials, knowledge. Now came the hard part, waiting, letting the place be found. Trusting that the refuge would serve its purpose, she felt vulnerable in a new way. For 3 years, Stillwater Haven had been hers alone, private, secret. Opening it to others meant risk. What if someone came who didn't respect it? What if word got out to authorities? What if she'd built all this for nothing? But she thought of Josephine's words. What's the point of knowledge if you die with it? What was the point of building a refuge if no one ever found refuge there? She had to trust, had to believe that the right people would come, that she'd know how to help them when they did. A storm built on the horizon one early September evening. Corinne watched it roll in, dark clouds gathering over the peaks, lightning flickering in the distance. The air felt heavy, charged. Rain was coming, probably a big one. She secured everything outside, brought in extra firewood, checked that both cabins were tight. The chickens huddled in their coop, sensing the storm. Even Russet the fox, still around after all these years, now with a mate and kits, took shelter in the old den at the clearing's edge. Corinne made dinner, ate by her fire, watched through the window as the storm approached. She felt oddly restless, like something was coming beyond just weather, like the universe was shifting, preparing to deliver what she'd been waiting for. "Michael," she said quietly, "if you can hear me wherever you are, I think tomorrow might be important. I think someone might need help. I'm ready. At least I hope I'm ready." She went to bed as the first raindrops started falling, pattering on the roof, building to a steady drumming. Thunder rolled across the mountains. Wind howled through the trees. It was the kind of storm that made you grateful for solid walls and a good roof. Somewhere out there, Kyle Morrison was not grateful. He was lost, soaked, terrified, and in trouble. He'd gotten turned around on the 3rd day of his hike. The trail had become unclear, or he'd missed a marker, and suddenly nothing looked familiar. He'd tried to backtrack, but only got more confused. Then the storm hit. Cold rain turning the forest into a maze of shadows and mud. He twisted his ankle badly, stepping into a hidden depression, pain shooting up his leg. Now he was limping, lost, cold, with night approaching and no idea which direction led to safety. He made camp in a poor spot, unable to go farther on his injured ankle. His tent leaked. His fire wouldn't start with everything soaked. He ate a protein bar, his last one, and tried not to panic, but panic came anyway. He was alone in the wilderness, hurt, with no one knowing exactly where he was. If he didn't find his way out in the next day or two, if the ankle got worse, if he couldn't walk, he pulled out his emergency whistle, the one his mother had insisted he bring. He blew it 3 sharp blasts, the universal signal for distress. The sound vanished into wind and rain. He waited. Nothing. He blew again. 3 blasts. Silence except for the storm. He'd do it again in the morning, he decided. If he survived the night, if the cold and wet didn't do him in, if a bear didn't find him, if he huddled in his leaking tent, shivering, ankle-throbbing, and wondered if this was how he'd die. Alone in the woods, having accomplished nothing, leaving no mark on the world except debt and broken relationships. The night was long and miserable. Morning came grey and dripping. Kyle crawled from his tent, everything wet, everything cold. His ankle had swollen overnight, purple and grotesque. He couldn't put weight on it without gasping, but he had to move, had to try. He blew the whistle again. 3 blasts. Waited. Nothing. Again. 3 blasts, and half a mile away, through morning mist and dripping trees, Corinne Yates was checking her fish traps and heard something. A whistle. Faint but unmistakable. She froze, listening. There. Again. 3 blasts. Someone needed help. Corinne didn't hesitate. She grabbed her pack, always ready with medical supplies, rope, emergency gear. She grabbed her walking stick, and she headed toward the sound, moving fast through terrain she knew better than the lines on her own palm. Years of teaching had given her instincts for when someone needed help. You helped. You didn't question. You didn't wait. You acted. The whistle blew again. Closer now. She adjusted her direction, moving steadily through the wet forest, and in his miserable camp. Kyle Morrison blew the whistle one more time, not really believing anyone would hear, not really believing he'd be found. But sometimes, when you're lost and desperate and blow that whistle into the void, someone answers. Sometimes the mountains themselves provide refuge. Sometimes a 65-year-old woman who built a sanctuary from nothing comes walking through the trees like salvation. Sometimes you get saved, and sometimes the person saving you needs saving too, in their own way, needs to know their work matters, needs to see the refuge serve its purpose, needs to prove that building something good is never wasted. Even if it takes years to see the results, Corinne moved through the forest, following the sound, and felt in her bones that everything was about to change. Corinne found him 20 minutes after hearing the first whistle. He was huddled against a fallen log, face pale with pain and cold, one ankle wrapped crudely in a torn t-shirt. His eyes went wide when he saw her emerge from the trees, a woman in her 60s, weathered and competent, appearing like something from a dream or hallucination. "I'm Corinne," she said calmly, kneeling beside him. "You're going to be fine. Can you walk at all?" Kyle's voice came out hoarse. "I don't think so. My ankle, let me see." She unwrapped his makeshift bandage, examined the swelling with practiced hands. Not broken, probably, but a bad sprain. He needed elevation, ice, if she had any, proper wrapping. "What's your name?" "Kyle Morrison." "Well, Kyle, you're lucky. I heard your whistle. I'm not far from here, about half a mile. I've got shelter, medical supplies, food. Think you can make it if I help you? You live out here." He looked at her like she might be a hallucination after all. "I do. 3 years now. Built a place. You'll see." She helped him to his feet, supporting him on one side, handing him a walking stick she'd brought. "Slow and steady. We'll get you there." The walk took 40 minutes. That felt like hours to Kyle. Every step on his injured ankle sent pain shooting up his leg. But Corinne was patient, strong for her age, keeping him upright and moving. She talked to distract him from the pain, asking simple questions about where he'd come from, what had happened. "Just needed to clear my head," he said. "Everything fell apart. Marriage, job, life. Thought the mountains would help." "They will," Corinne said. "Just not the way you expected." When they emerged into the clearing and Kyle saw Stillwater Haven, he stopped dead despite his pain. 2 solid log cabins, smoke rising from one chimney. A well-maintained garden, chicken coop, smokehouse. Paths, structures, signs of established life. "You built this, all of this?" "With my own hands." "Come on, let's get you inside." She led him to the guest cabin, thank God she'd finished it, and helped him onto the bed. The space was warm, dry, simple but comfortable. Kyle looked around in disbelief while Corinne fetched supplies. She cleaned his ankle, wrapped it properly, elevated it on rolled blankets. She made him hot tea with herbs for pain. She brought bread she'd baked, smoked fish, dried fruit. Real food, warm and nourishing. Kyle ate like he was starving, which he probably was. She let him eat in peace, then started a fire in the small stove to warm the cabin properly. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. 3 days. Got lost on day 2. He looked ashamed. "I thought I knew what I was doing. I used to hike in college. The mountains don't care what you used to do. They care what you can do now." She said it without judgment, just fact. "You'll heal here. Ankle needs a week at least, maybe 2. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. I can't just, who are you? How are you?" He gestured at the window, at the impossibility of what she'd built. Corinne sat in the chair by his bed, considering how much to say. "I'm someone who lost everything 3 years ago. My son died. My marriage ended. The bank took my house. I walked into these mountains because I didn't know what else to do. I built this place because I needed to survive. And now it's here for people like you. People who need space to figure things out." Kyle stared at her. "People know about this. Not many. The people who need to know." She stood, moved to the door. "Rest now. I'll check on you this evening. There's water in the pitcher, chamber pot under the bed. Yell if you need something." "Wait!" Kyle's voice stopped her. "Why did you help me?" "You don't know me." Corinne turned back, and her expression was kind but firm. "Because you blew the whistle. Because you asked for help. That's the hardest part for most people, admitting they need help. You did that. So I'm helping. Simple as that." She left him there, warm and safe and bewildered. Walked back to her own cabin, made herself dinner, sat by her fire thinking about the man in the guest cabin. He was younger than she'd expected for the first person to find Stillwater Haven. Young enough to rebuild completely, to have decades ahead. But old enough to understand real loss, real failure. She'd seen it in his eyes, that hollow look she'd seen in her own mirror 3 years ago. He'd heal. The ankle would take time, but the rest, the real injuries, would take longer. She could help with that if he let her. Could give him what the mountains had given her. Space, purpose, the chance to discover he was stronger than he knew. Outside, night was falling. The storm had passed, leaving everything clean and fresh. Stars appeared in the clearing sky. Corinne stood on her porch, looking at the guest cabin, where light glowed in the window, and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Not quite happiness. Not yet, but something close. Satisfaction, maybe. The knowledge that all the work, all the struggle, all the building hadn't been for nothing. Stillwater Haven had found its purpose. And so, maybe, had she. Morning brought clarity. Kyle woke in the guest cabin, warm and dry for the first time in days, his ankle throbbing but manageable. For a moment he forgot where he was, then remembered the storm, the whistle, the woman emerging from the forest like she'd been conjured. Corinne appeared at his door with breakfast, eggs from her chickens, bread, fresh water. She checked his ankle, rewrapped it, nodded approval at the reduced swelling. "Healing starts fast when you're young," she said. "Give it another day or 2, you'll be able to walk with support. I need to get back. People will be worried." "Will they?" She looked at him directly. "Who knows exactly where you went?" Kyle hesitated. "My parents know I'm hiking, but not where specifically, so they're worried already. Another few days won't change that. Besides, you can't walk out on that ankle yet." She sat in the chair, studying him. "Tell me something, Kyle. What were you running from, or running to?" The question was gentle but unflinching. Kyle found himself answering honestly. "Running from failure, I guess. Everything collapsed, marriage, job, apartment. I'm 34 and living with my parents. I feel like I wasted my whole life, and you thought the mountains would give you answers?" "I don't know what I thought," he laughed bitterly. "Clearly I didn't think very well. Got myself lost and hurt. But you found this place." Corinne gestured at the cabin, the clearing visible through the window. "Maybe that's the answer you needed." Over the next days, as Kyle healed, Corinne told him everything. About Michael, about losing her marriage and home, about walking into the wilderness with nothing but a pack and will, about building Stillwater Haven from scratch, one log at a time. About Josephine's journal and the legacy she was carrying forward. Kyle listened, fascinated and humbled. This woman, this 65-year-old woman, had accomplished something impossible, had taken devastation and transformed it into purpose. How did you do it? He asked. How did you keep going when everything was gone? I didn't have a choice. Or rather, I had two choices, lie down and die or stand up and live. I chose to live, she paused. The thing is, Kyle, losing everything can be a gift if you let it be. When you have nothing left to lose, you're free to become whoever you want to be. No expectations, no one watching, just you and what you're capable of. I don't feel capable of much. Neither did I at first. But capability isn't something you have. It's something you build. One decision at a time, one action at a time, one day at a time. She stood, moved to the door. Come outside when you can walk. I want to show you something. That afternoon, leaning on a walking stick Corinne provided, Kyle toured Stillwater Haven properly. She showed him everything. The main cabin she'd built first, the guest cabin where he stayed, the smokehouse, the root cellar, the garden, the chicken coop. She explained how each thing worked, what she'd learned building it, mistakes she'd made and corrected. All of this, Kyle said, standing in the center of the clearing. You did alone? Mostly. Vernon, old trapper, you might meet him, helped with some supplies. But the building, the work, yes, alone. Why did you make the second cabin? Corinne pulled Josephine's photograph from her pocket, the one showing Josephine and 3 other women. She handed it to Kyle. This was taken in 1950, right about here. Woman on the left is Josephine Hartley. She built the first refuge on this land, helped women who needed to escape, to heal, to start over. I found her journal 2 years ago. Realized I was meant to continue her work. Kyle studied the photograph. So this place, Stillwater Haven, it's for people like them, like me, for people who need it. People at the end of their rope. People who need space to figure out who they are when everything else is stripped away. She looked at him directly. That's you, isn't it? That's why you're here. He nodded slowly. I think so. I just didn't know it until now. Most people don't. Corinne took the photograph back, tucked it away carefully. You can stay as long as you need, Kyle, week, month, whatever. But eventually, you'll have to go back. Have to face what you left. This place isn't about hiding forever. It's about getting strong enough to face your life again. What if I'm not sure I can? You can, because you blew that whistle. You asked for help. That takes more courage than most people ever show. She smiled, and it transformed her weathered face. Besides, you found this place. That means something. The mountains don't show themselves to just anyone. They stood in the clearing, the sun warm on their faces, the chickens scratching nearby, the creek murmuring its constant song. Kyle felt something shift inside him. Not hope exactly, not yet, but the possibility of hope. The understanding that maybe failure wasn't final. Maybe starting over at 34 wasn't the end of the world. Maybe he could rebuild like Corinne had. I want to help, he said suddenly. While I'm here, I want to work, contribute something. What needs doing? Corinne's smile widened. Everything. There's always something that needs doing. Think you can split firewood on one leg? I can try. Good answer. That's always the right answer out here. I can try. She handed him the axe, showed him the woodpile that needed splitting. Kyle took it, felt the weight, remembered he'd never really done this before. But he swung, awkward at first, then finding rhythm. The wood split. He felt absurdly proud. Corinne watched, nodded approval, then went back to her own work. And Kyle kept splitting wood one piece at a time, building strength and purpose with each swing. This was healing, he realized. Not medicine or therapy. Just work, just being useful, just contributing something. This was what Stillwater Haven offered. Not escape, transformation. Kyle stayed 2 weeks at Stillwater Haven. His ankle healed. His spirit healed too, more slowly but just as surely. He split wood, helped with the garden, learned to fish the creek the way Corinne had taught herself. They talked in the evenings by the fire, sharing stories, sharing silence. She told him about Michael, about the grief that never fully disappeared but did transform. He told her about his marriage, about the slow death of something he'd thought would last forever. Going back won't be easy. Corinne said one night. People will have questions, judgment. I know, but I think I'm ready now. He looked at her across the fire. You saved my life, not just from the storm, from myself. You saved your own life. I just provided space for you to do it. She poked the fire, sending sparks into the dark sky. That's all this place is, space. What people do with it is up to them. The day Kyle left, Corinne packed him supplies, food, water, a better map than he'd brought. She gave him a copy of the hand-drawn map to Stillwater Haven. If you meet someone who needs this place, you'll know. Give them this. Tell them to follow the marked trails. Tell them they're welcome, but they have to do the work. She handed him something else, a small carved figure, a fox. I made this, so you remember. Kyle turned it over in his hands, throat tight. I'll never forget any of this. Good, now go face your life. And Kyle, don't waste time feeling ashamed. You got lost. You got found. That's the story. Tell it honestly. She watched him walk out of the clearing, watched until he disappeared into the trees. Then she went back to work, back to maintaining Stillwater Haven, back to preparing for whoever might come next. But Kyle didn't just return to his old life. He went to Sheriff Ben Holloway's office in Millbrook first, asking to speak to him privately. He told the whole story, getting lost, finding Corinne Yates, Stillwater Haven, everything. Ben listened, his weathered face showing surprise, then understanding, then something like awe. She's alive. Corinne's alive. More than alive. She's thriving. She's built something incredible up there. I should. Ben stopped. What does she want? Does she want to be found officially? Kyle thought carefully. She wants people to know she's okay. She wants people who need help to be able to find her. But she doesn't want interference. Doesn't want regulations or officials telling her what she can and can't do. She's built something pure up there. Something that works. It needs to stay that way. Ben nodded slowly. I can work with that. I'll let people know she's safe. Put out word quietly to the right folks, people who might need what she's offering. But I won't make it official. Won't bring agencies into it. She's earned that much. Word spread through Millbrook in the careful way small-town news does. Corinne Yates wasn't dead. She'd built a homestead in the mountains. She was helping people who needed help. Paula Drummond cried with relief. Tommy Brenner smiled and said he'd known that was a good axe. Robert, hearing the news, felt something complicated, regret maybe, or recognition of what he'd lost. Over the following months, people trekked up to Stillwater Haven, some just curious, wanting to see what Corinne had built. She welcomed them, gave tours, answered questions, but made clear this wasn't a tourist attraction. Those people left respectful, but didn't stay. Others came for the real reason, because they needed refuge. A woman named Harriet, recently widowed, struggling with isolation and purposelessness. She stayed 3 weeks, learning to work the land, finding strength she'd forgotten she had. A man named James, recovering from addiction, needing space away from temptation. He stayed a month, chopping wood until his hands bled and his mind cleared. Vernon continued bringing supplies, spreading word discreetly. Sheriff Ben sent people occasionally, domestic violence survivors, veterans struggling with trauma. Anyone who needed the kind of healing only silence and work and mountains could provide. Stillwater Haven became what it was always meant to be, a place of transformation. Not advertised, not official, just known to those who needed to know. Corinne aged into her late 60s, then early 70s, still strong, still capable, still teaching people how to rebuild themselves one log at a time. She planted a small orchard, apples, pears, trees that would outlive her and provide for whoever came after. She maintained Josephine's journal and her own beside it, documenting everything for future caretakers. She created a guest book in the main cabin, asked everyone who stayed to write their story. The pages filled slowly with gratitude, with transformation, with evidence that what she'd built mattered. One evening, 5 years after Kyle's visit, Corinne sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. There was a guest in the cabin, a young woman dealing with loss, finding her footing again. The chickens were settling for the night. The garden was producing. The smoke from both chimneys rose straight up into calm air. She pulled out Michael's compass, the brass worn smooth by years of handling, and watched the needle point north. True north. Steady and certain. I kept my promise, kiddo, she said softly. I kept exploring. I didn't let myself get stuck. I built something good, something that helps people. I hope you can see it wherever you are. I hope you're proud. The mountains didn't answer, but they didn't need to. She could feel the rightness of it, the way her life had bent from tragedy toward purpose, from loss toward legacy. What did you do after you lost everything? She'd built Stillwater Haven. She'd discovered who Corinne Yates really was, underneath all the roles she'd played. A survivor, a builder, a teacher still, just teaching different lessons. She'd learned that 62 wasn't too late to start over. That strength grew from necessity. That the hardest thing about asking for help was asking. But once you did, help came. She'd learned that some places hold space for transformation, if you're willing to do the work. That you could lose everything and still build something meaningful from what remained. That legacy wasn't about what you left behind, but about what you helped others discover in themselves. The sun dipped below the peaks. Stars emerged. The young woman in the guest cabin lit her lamp. Corinne rose, stretched muscles that still worked despite their age, and went inside to her own fire, her own home. The life she'd built with nothing but will and two hands, and the stubborn refusal to give up. Stillwater Haven stood solid against the coming night, a refuge in the wilderness, waiting for whoever would need it next. And Corinne Yates, the mountain woman who'd left town with nothing and built something impossible, tended the fire that would keep burning long after she was gone. Because some things hope. Resilience, the human capacity for transformation, couldn't be destroyed by loss. They could only be rebuilt, one piece at a time, until they stood strong enough to shelter others. That was the story. That was the answer. That was what she'd built alone, that left people stunned. Not just cabins and gardens, but proof that starting over was possible. That you were never too old, never too broken, never too lost to find your way home.